The W202 C-Class was meant to be the future. Instead, it became a relic. It stands as the last car built when engineers still believed in absolute permanence. Arriving at a pivotal moment in automotive history, it balanced on a razor edge between the old world of cost-no-object craftsmanship and the incoming tide of mass-market efficiency. It was the final moment the engineers held the checkbook before the accountants took over. To understand why this machine feels so different from what we drive today, we have to look back at the specific world that created it. If you appreciate the craftsmanship of the past, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep these stories alive. The burden on the shoulders of the development team in Stuttgart was crushing. It is hard to overstate just how important the 1993 launch really was. They were tasked with replacing the 190e, a car that had single-handedly reinvented the compact executive segment in the 1980s. You do not just replace an icon like that, you have to surpass it while convincing the world that a smaller Mercedes is still a real Mercedes. The pressure was immense because the automotive landscape was changing rapidly. The mandate for the W202 was clear but difficult. The goal was to create a condensed version of the massive W140 C-Class. That car was a technological fortress, a cathedral of engineering that dominated the road. The C-Class had to capture that same essence in a package that was significantly smaller. It was not enough to just look like the big flagship. It had to feel like it. It had to possess that same unwavering stability and that same sense of isolation from the outside world. This was a risky proposition. There was a genuine fear inside the company that a more affordable entry-level model would dilute the brand. The critics and the public had called the previous model the Baby Benz, a term that carried a hint of condescension. It implied that this was not the real thing, that it was a compromise for those who could not afford a proper sedan. The W202 had to destroy that perception completely. It had to prove that size had nothing to do with quality. The engineers responded with obsession. They focused on the things you could feel, but perhaps not see. They focused on the thickness of the steel and the density of the sound insulation. They focused on how the switchgear operated, with a deliberate heavy resistance. Every component was designed to communicate durability. They were building a car that was meant to last for decades, not just for a 3-year lease cycle like modern vehicles. This legitimacy was crucial. The car had to earn its place in the lineup. It could not just rely on the badge on the hood. It had to earn the respect of a clientele that was used to the best. But something happened in the late 1990s that would change this philosophy forever. It did not come from the engineers, it came from the boardroom. But mechanical perfection is only half the story. To truly understand the soul of this machine, you have to look at how it was shaped. It was a vision defined by one man and his obsession with the idea that a car should never look old. The visual identity of the W202 was defined by a man named Bruno Sacco. As the head of design at Mercedes-Benz, Sacco operated under a philosophy that seems almost radical in today's fast-paced world. He believed that a car should not be designed for a single season, but for eternity. He coined the term vertical affinity to describe his approach. This meant that the smallest car in the lineup had to share a clear visual relationship with the largest and most expensive models. When you saw a C-Class on the road, Sacco wanted you to see a condensed S-Class, not a compromise. This is why the W202 shares the same commanding grille, the same ribbed taillights, and the same upright, confident posture as the massive W140 flagship. It was about granting the owner a sense of dignity, regardless of which model they could afford. In the early 1990s, the automotive world was obsessed with a trend known as bio-design. Competitors were releasing cars with melted organic shapes and excessive curves, trying to look futuristic. Sacco and his team rejected this entirely. They understood that trends fade quickly, but architecture lasts. They gave the C-Class straight, sober lines and a boxy silhouette that prioritized function over fashion. It was a rejection of the frivolous. The car looked serious because it was a serious piece of engineering. This restraint is exactly why the design has aged so gracefully. While its curvaceous rivals from the 90s now look dated and strange, the W202 simply looks like a classic Mercedes-Benz. It has a timeless quality that commands respect, but it also made the car vulnerable to a trend that was about to sweep through the entire industry, one that would make timelessness look like a liability. This sense of permanence continued the moment you stepped inside. The interior was not designed to dazzle you with gadgets. It was designed to serve you. The layout was a masterclass in ergonomics and clarity. The driver sat behind a large, thin-rimmed steering wheel that felt substantial in the hands. The dashboard was a solid, uncluttered cliff of high-quality materials. The gauges were big, analog, and instantly readable, with bright orange needles resting against a clear black background. There were no digital screens to fade or glitch over time. It was a cockpit built for the long haul. The materials themselves were chosen for longevity rather than showroom flash. If you opted for the wood trim, you received genuine zebrano or walnut veneer, polished to a deep shine. It brought a warmth to the cabin that plastic simply cannot replicate. The standard upholstery was often MB-Tex, a vinyl material so incredibly durable that it is legendary among enthusiasts. It is not uncommon to find a two with hundreds of thousands of miles on the odometer, where the seats still look virtually brand new. But the true luxury was found in the tactile experience. Every switch and button was engineered to have a specific heavy weight to it. When you pressed a button, it clicked with a satisfying mechanical authority. It felt expensive. The power seat controls, shaped like the seat itself and placed intuitively on the door panel, were a perfect example of this thoughtful engineering. You simply moved the little seat on the door, and the real seat moved with it. These details created an atmosphere of absolute calm. It was a quiet, secure space that isolated you from the chaos of the road. However, a handsome face and a comfortable chair are nothing without the structure to back them up. To truly understand the legend of this car, one must look underneath the metal skin. The foundation of the Dow was not merely steel, it was a philosophy of absolute rigidity. When the engineers in Stuttgart developed the unibody structure, they were not attempting to shave grams for marginal fuel economy gains. They were attempting to construct a mobile fortress. They utilized high-grade, heavy-gauge steel and welded it with a density that created a chassis of immense stiffness. This explains why the car feels so incredibly heavy. Despite being technically categorized as a compact sedan, it weighed significantly more than the bonnet replaced. But every ounce of that additional mass was invested in structural reinforcement and sound deadening. When you drive one today, even 3 decades later, you do not hear the rattles, squeaks, and flecks that plague other vehicles of this vintage. You hear silence. It is a heavy, dampened silence that feels expensive. Speaking of a machine built to survive a collision with a freight train, this obsession with solidity extended to the suspension. While the automotive press enamored the sharp BMW 3 Series, Mercedes deliberately ignored that benchmark. They understood their customer wanted to float above the road, not feel every pebble. Utilizing a sophisticated double wishbone front and multi-link rear setup, they tuned the car for absolute serenity rather than lap times. It moves down the highway with a narcotic fluidity, absorbing potholes with a distant, muted thump. It was designed to lower your heart rate, not raise it. This created a driving experience that felt uniquely mature. To drive a D2 is to engage with a machine that requires deliberation. The steering is not twitchy or hyper-reactive. It uses a recirculating ball system, which provides a heavy, muted feedback that filters out the nervousness of the road. You have to guide the car with intention. Even the gas pedal feels different. It has a long, heavy travel that resists a nervous foot. The car does not jump forward the moment you touch the throttle. It gathers itself, takes a breath, and then surges forward with a linear, unstoppable momentum. It filters out the noise of the mechanical process, leaving the driver in a state of isolated command. It feels substantial, as if the car were carved from a single block of granite rather than assembled from thousands of parts. The durability of the materials inside the cabin is equally legendary. While other luxury manufacturers were switching to soft-touch plastics that would eventually peel and become sticky, Mercedes stuck to their proven formulas. The standard upholstery, known as MB-Tex, is a vinyl material so robust that it effectively stops the aging process. You can find examples of this car that have spent decades baking in the sun, yet the seats remain firm and uncracked. The dashboard materials are equally resilient, refusing to warp or split under thermal stress. This was the engineering of permanence. They were building a car that would likely outlive its original owner. Under the hood, the W202 brought the C-Class into the modern era. It introduced a new generation of multi-valve engines that were smoother and more efficient than the outgoing mills. Whether it was the indestructible 4-cylinder or the silky smooth inline-6, the power delivery was designed to be effortless. It was never about raw, neck-snapping acceleration. It was about having a deep reserve of power that was always available but never intrusive. The engine was a distant hum, a servant that did its job without demanding attention. This was the pinnacle of the comfortable, sensible Mercedes sedan. However, while the vast majority of these cars were destined for quiet lives in the suburbs, there was a small team of engineers who looked at this overbuilt chassis and asked a dangerous question: what if we did not want quiet? They saw potential specifically because the structure was so strong. They realized that if you took this velvet glove and filled it with an iron fist, you could create a monster. While the standard C-Class was designed to soothe the driver into a state of relaxed compliance, there was a skunkworks operation unfolding that sought to exploit the immense rigidity of that over-engineered chassis. This is the chapter where the story of the W202 transforms from a tale of sensible luxury into one of mechanical madness. This was the birth of the modern relationship between Mercedes-Benz and AMG. Before this moment, AMG was a famous but independent tuning house, a place where you sent your car to be modified after you bought it. The C36 AMG changed that forever. It was the first car jointly developed from the ground up, a vehicle you could order directly from the dealership with a full factory warranty. It represented a handshake between the establishment and the rebels. The creation of the C36 was a logistical nightmare defined by passion. Mercedes built a partially finished C280 in Bremen, then shipped it to the AMG facility in a Falterbach. There, craftsmen effectively took the car apart to rebuild it. They subjected the standard inline-6 engine to radical surgery, boring it out, increasing the stroke, and fitting custom internals to swell displacement to 3.6 liters. This was not a computer tune. It was heavy mechanical intervention. This engine was the heart of the experience. In an era where machines were becoming increasingly automated, the AMG engines were hand-assembled by a single technician. One man, one engine. When you popped the hood, you found a plaque with the signature of the specific human being who built your power plant. It created a personal connection between the builder and the driver, a reminder that this was a piece of craftsmanship, not just a consumer product. The result was 276 horsepower, a number that commanded serious respect in 1995. But, unlike its rival, the BMW M3, which screamed to the red line with a frenetic energy, the C36 delivered its power like a tidal wave. It was deep, torquey, and relentless. It did not ask you to work for the speed, it simply provided it. However, the engineers at a Falterbach were not finished. In 1997, they decided that 6 cylinders were simply not enough. They looked at the compact engine bay of the W202 and asked a question that only a madman would ask. Could we fit a V8 in there? The answer was the C43 AMG. This was a watershed moment. It was the first time a V8 engine had ever been factory installed in a C-Class. They took the 4.3-liter M113 engine from the much larger E-Class and squeezed it between the front shock towers. The transformation was profound. The C43 was a hot rod in a tailored German suit. It produced over 300 horsepower and 300 pound-feet of torque. The soundtrack changed from the smooth singing of the inline-6 to the deep burbling thunder of a V8. It gave the car a dual personality that was intoxicating. At a cruise, it was quiet, comfortable, and civilized, retaining all the insulation and refinement of the standard model. But if you buried the throttle, the nose would lift, the transmission would kick down, and the car would hurl itself toward the horizon with a violence that belied its conservative appearance. That appearance was perhaps the most delightful aspect of these cars. They were the ultimate sleepers. Aside from a slightly more aggressive front bumper, subtle side skirts, and distinct monoblock alloy wheels, they looked remarkably similar to the diesel taxis that were ferrying tourists around Berlin. They did not have massive wings or hood scoops. They practiced restraint. You could park one in front of a bank or an opera house and nobody would bat an eye. Yet, on the Autobahn, they could embarrass dedicated sports cars. They were the ancestors of the modern super sedan, but they were built with an old-world quality that would soon disappear. These peaks of performance highlighted just how good the basic chassis really was. The structure handled the massive increase in power without a single complaint. But while the engineers were celebrating these triumphs of mechanical excess, the industry around them was shifting. The clouds were gathering, and the pressure to cut costs was about to change everything. In the mid-1990s, purchasing a W202 was a serious financial commitment. The sticker price was significantly higher than its mass-market contemporaries, and even higher than many of its direct domestic rivals. But the customer of that era understood the equation differently than we do today. You were not paying a premium simply for the prestige of the three-pointed star on the hood. You were paying for the invisible labor that went into the machine. You were paying for the extra hours of testing, the higher grade of steel, and the refusal to compromise on component quality. The high price was a barrier to entry, but it was either a warranty against obsolescence. It was a statement that you were buying a product that had been finished, not just manufactured. The specification of these cars also reflected a different set of priorities. Mercedes offered distinct lines, most notably elegance and sport trims. These were not just marketing packages, they fundamentally altered the character of the car. The elegance models featured softer springs, higher ride height, and warm burl walnut wood, designed for comfort above all else. The sport models featured stiffer suspension and technical interior trim. Yet despite these choices, the list of standard features could be surprisingly sparse. You often had to pay extra for power windows in the rear or for a CD player. The value proposition was not in the gadgets you received, but in the unassailable quality of the base car itself. Buying a C-Class in 1995 was a long-term relationship, not a 3-year lease. These cars were purchased to be kept for decades, often passed down from parent to child. This perspective justified the initial expense. Amortized over 20 years of reliable service, the W202 was actually a bargain, a durable good that retained its function long after the warranty expired. This mindset of buy it once, buy it right, was the cornerstone of the brand's loyalty. However, the automotive landscape outside of Stuttgart was evolving rapidly. By the late 90s, the gap between Mercedes and the rest of the field was beginning to close. Audi had launched the A4, a car that offered sleek design and high-quality interiors at a price point that undercut the C-Class. From Japan, Lexus was proving that you could achieve Mercedes levels of reliability without the German price premium. The market was becoming crowded with competent rivals who were willing to offer more features for less money. Consumers began to question the necessity of the Mercedes premium. Was the vault-like door really worth the extra cost when the competition looked so much more modern? Simultaneously, a seismic shift was occurring within the corporate culture of Mercedes-Benz itself. The company was preparing for a massive expansion, looking toward a future that would culminate in the merger with Chrysler. Internal priorities began to drift. The absolute power of the engineering department was being eroded by the demands of the finance department. The mandate shifted from build the best car possible to build the most profitable car possible. The pressure to increase production volumes and reduce manufacturing costs became the new religion. Engineers who had championed the over-engineered components were suddenly finding themselves on the defensive. This pressure created a unique tension in the final years of the W202's life. It stood as a relic of the old way of thinking, trying to survive in a new economy. It was a car built by people who believed in permanence, sold in a market that was increasingly obsessed with the disposable. The W202 held the line, maintaining its quality until the very end of production. But the writing was on the wall. The forces of cost-cutting were gathering at the gates. The pressure would eventually lead to a drastic change in how the C-Class was conceived. The next generation would not just look different, it would feel fundamentally different in ways that would become impossible to ignore. The turning point arrived with the W203 in the year 2000. It signaled a profound shift. Wearing a new face with fused rounded headlights, enthusiasts nicknamed Peanuts. This visual softening departed from the architectural severity that had defined the brand. Straight lines were replaced by fluid curves and a windswept profile. While modern for the time, it looked lighter, less substantial, and far more eager to please a mass-market audience than to uphold a tradition of stoic engineering. This visual transition was merely the surface of a deeper change. As the generations progressed through the sharp-edged W204 and the curvaceous W205, the prioritization of materials began to invert. The heavy-gauge steel that gave the W202 its tank-like demeanor was progressively replaced by aluminum and high-strength alloys. While this was necessary for fuel efficiency and crash safety standards, it undeniably altered the sensory experience. The car became lighter on its feet, but it also lost that gravitational pull, that sense of being anchored to the earth, which had defined the driving experience of its predecessor. The contrast becomes starkest when you place the W202 beside the current iteration, the W206. The modern cabin is a spectacle of technology, dominated by massive floating touchscreens and ambient lighting that rivals a nightclub. It is impressive, certainly, but it feels fundamentally different. If you knock your knuckles against the dashboard of the modern car, you are often met with a hollow plastic resonance. The center consoles are frequently clad in piano black plastic, a material that scratches easily and collects dust, chosen for its showroom shine rather than its longevity. The buttons have been replaced by haptic touch surfaces that lack the satisfying mechanical click of a physical switch. The interior feels like a consumer electronics product, designed to be dazzling today but outdated tomorrow. It is in the small, forgotten details that the loss is most painful. In the W202, the glove box was lined with a rich, soft flocking that felt like velvet. In modern equivalents, you are often greeted by bare, hard plastic. The glass in the old car felt thick and heavy, isolating you from the world. Today, the glass is thinner, relying on acoustic films to do the work that mass once did. And then there is the door. The sound of a W202 door closing was a low-frequency thud, a sound that communicated safety and closure. The modern door closes with a higher-pitched click, a sound of efficiency rather than permanence. This degradation was not an accident. It was a change in business models. The industry moved from a philosophy of engineered to last to one of engineered to lease. Manufacturers realized that building a car that lasts for 20 years is not the most profitable strategy when you want customers to return every 36 months. The focus shifted to immediate showroom appeal, connectivity, and lease rates. The long-term durability of the dashboard material or the serviceability of the window regulator became secondary concerns. The car transformed from a durable good into a disposable service. Looking back, the W202 was not just another model in the lineage. It was the end of the line for the cost, no object mindset in the entry-level segment. It was the last time the engineers were allowed to overbuild the smallest car in the fleet, simply because it wore the three-point edge star. It stood as the final guardian of a legacy where luxury was defined by the weight of the controls and the silence of the cabin, rather than the resolution of a screen or the number of colors in the ambient lighting system. The W202 stands today as a silent reminder of a different time. It comes from an era where luxury meant substance, not just digital distractions. It asks whether we have traded durability for disposability and whether the progress we celebrate has come at the cost of the car's soul. We must appreciate the heavy analog nature of the past before it disappears entirely. If you appreciate the craftsmanship of the past, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep these stories alive.